used in a relatively light and nuanced way, and not in a heavy way. But I think the lesson that comes out of Iraq and Afghanistan is that if we tread too heavily in Muslim space, in Islamic space, then very quickly, whatever our intentions are, it can be very easily turned around that we have come to impose our lifestyle on their space. Actually, our lifestyle to them is pretty unattractive. I mean, if we look at our own society now, a very changed society from 20, 30, 40 years ago, I think any self-respecting Muslim would say, thank you very much, West. I don't want your lifestyle actually here. So for them to think, and that's how they can very easily get radicalized, that we have come to their country, to their space, their Islamic space, to produce, to impose on them our very unattractive lifestyle. Not surprisingly, rather as Tom was saying, a bit like Saudis patrolling up and down Exhibition Road. We wouldn't want it if they were trying to impose their lifestyle on us. So quite rightly, we can actually understand, if we think about it, why they don't want us to impose our lifestyle on them. But that's actually not what we've been trying to do. As far as Iraq, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, all we're trying to do is to give them the opportunity of living in a rather more stable life, have a country which exists in a traditional way, but one which does not exhibit failed and failing state characteristics and ungoverned space into which Al-Qaeda could return. Because it's the Islamist agenda that actually is the threat that we've really got to recognise and deal with. And the Islamist agenda is nothing to do with Islam per se. Judaism, Christianity and Islam are three of the world's great religions with common origins. So our issue is not with Islam, but our issue is perfectly reasonably with those who for their own purposes have chosen to hijack, manipulate and pervert one of the world's great religions, Islam, for their own essentially political purposes. And that's what needs to be dealt with. And I would rather be dealing with it at arm's length in South Asia, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, than I would having it come closer here. And one of the interesting issues about Libya, which I'll come to in a moment before I close, is I think the dog that's not barked in Libya is the dog of the Muslim Brotherhood of the Islamist agenda. And long may that be the case. And it probably won't bark, provided what's happening in Libya can move sufficiently quickly that a decent broadly based government and the Transitional National Council is not trying to put in place an Islamic state of Libya, but actually a very broadly based state, gives us great cause for optimism for the future. But actually treading heavily in Islamic space actually constituted bad news. And I think the hope for the future is that the lesson we applied then in Libya was that this was an issue that the Libyans had to settle for themselves. Clearly, once what happened in Tunisia happened, what happened in Egypt happened, didn't happen quite as quickly as others would have liked to see it happen in Libya. It got as far as Benghazi and a bit further and got stuck around Misrata and certainly got stuck around Tripoli. And I think perfectly rightly, the international community passed UNSCR 1970 and 1973, empowering other nations to exercise military support in support of the National Transitional Council, the rebel forces in Libya. But we did it on a standoff basis, on an indirect basis. And the fact that naval forces and air forces were able to stand off and assist the Libyan forces was the big difference. What we've seen in Libya is a Libyan solution to a Libyan problem. We've seen Libyan boots on the ground. We've seen Libyan people fighting and dying for their own cause. We've helped them, but let them do it for themselves. And that is a huge change. And it's a huge change in the right direction. But I think in this whole question of intervention, just finally I'd go one step further than that and say, if what we've learned from Iraq and Afghanistan took us to the model that was applied in Libya, that is good. But what about going one stage beyond that? What about getting rather smarter at preventing conflict in the first place? What about getting rather smarter at using our ability to horizon scan, our ability to analyse situations, look at countries that might potentially fail or be failed or failing states and exhibit ungoverned space, and get alongside their governments early to build up their own capacity, their own capability to deal with their own issues. It's an old adage, I know, that prevention is better than cure. But if we can get alongside a country that is struggling and help them not to fail so that we then have to come in and intervene subsequently with all the difficult connotations that we're discussing and describing tonight, then that has to be a much better way. So I think my hope for the future is to put more governmental effort on a bilateral basis or a multilateral basis on getting upstream of the problem, to see which countries might fail in the future and help them to make sure that they don't fail. It'll be much cheaper in blood and treasure, and I think a much better model for the future. So we've had to learn lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan. I think we've seen a better model in Libya, but I think there is an even better way for the future of intervening in a very modest way and an essentially non-military way to get upstream of the problem, to prevent us having to go in to put people back on their feet when they've been knocked over. Much better to keep them on their feet and run their own countries in their own way.